Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following along on my pen journey. It continues to zig and zag and up and down and in and out, and that's the fun part. So here's a pen which I wouldn't have been aware of if I didn't see some videos and reviews on it on the internet. I do enjoy going on the internet and looking at pens. And I am a Duofold fan, as you all know. I've done my reviews on the Moonman version of it, and there's been many, many other versions of it, including Parker has come out with different versions of their Duofold design. I ordered an orange. I have to say, when I first took this out of its cellophane wrapper, I wasn't happy with the color because it's more in the yellow shade of orange. Here's the auction that I bid on and won, and it took a little bit of time to get here, more than usual, and the tracking was a little bit wonky, but it did show up and in good condition, so I'm happy about that. Here's the other colors that it's in. It's in a lot of different colors, which is interesting. And another pen reviewer talked about the fact that there's knockoff of the Jinhao Centennial pen. This one's not a knockoff, but be aware. This is in the $20 price range, so if you're getting something for $10 and it's called a Jinhao Centennial, then it probably is not. So we're going to relieve Mr. Crab. It's not real heavy, so he's not been exerting himself too much to hold the pen up. Yeah, the insert is nice, and it seems to be lined up fairly well with that clip. You know, you got logo, you got your logo here, your Jinhao logos. The cap band is just labeled very simply, in case there was any confusion. It's a Jinhao. The cap comes off with almost 3 turns, which is quite a lot, more than I think it should be. And we see the Duofold design elements continue to be utilized here. And the modern Duofold, not the vintage, and we will compare them all a little bit later. A nice two-tone nib, but we've seen that in other Jinhao pens, so that's not unique. You know, the barrel unscrews and you see your typical Jinhao converter. This is a nice metal section here. This is not plastic over brass. This is just 2 ends glued together with this plastic section in the middle. So there's the different bits. We'll dive in a little bit and see if this pen is worthy of its name. Here we have the Centennial, taken apart as much as I could. Standard Jinhao converter, nothing special there. This section has that nice metal piece into it, which is pretty long, so this seats fairly well. That's a nice feature. Always enjoy that and think it's good for keeping everything aligned and keeping that converter in place. This nib is in a nib collar. It's branded, but I couldn't pull the nib out. So what I did was I went to my X450 and pulled the nib out of that, just to show you that they do two-tone nibs, and they've done them for a while. And that 18 GP is, you know, gold plate. It's kind of like, you know, I was in jewelry, who cares? And this is that feed. The same feed is in the Centennial that I pulled out of the X450. So I don't know why I couldn't get it out. There's only a certain amount of effort I'm willing to do. These nibs write fairly well, and I'm not going to be in the adventure mood to try to swap it out. And if this pen becomes something that I love writing on a daily basis and I don't like the nib, then I'll be more aggressive in trying to swap it out. One of the things that I think is eventually going to bite the Chinese producers in their butt This is another proprietary, unique nib assembly. These threads are very coarse. Most of the nib assemblies like Moonman, they're very fine. And they brand this like they do the nib assemblies in the 992 and 991, so that's been carried over. But I don't know. If you could buy these like you can with Pen BBS, then I guess it would be nice. But I haven't seen these Jinhao assemblies for sale. Here we are with some very low light, but it's good for the LED to come into play. So let's take a look at the inside of that barrel. It looks like that finial here is just screwed down to hold in the clip. It looks like it's brass, so that shouldn't have a rusting issue. There's a little ledge in there to seal against the section, so it looks like it may hold the nib wet for a good period of time, which is what we like. I think we can see now my disappointment with the color of this Centennial. Next to it is the first remake that they made of the Duofold in the late 1980s. And this clip is more representative of these two vintage models of the Big Red, and that's the more appropriate name. Earlier versions came out with a single band, and they came out with 2 cap bands. They also had 3 on some models, and there were Canadian models. So this went through a lot of minor variations, and it came in multiple sizes. These are all in that Big Red category. So that's where we're at. I mean, you know, we're going to throw up weights here because I think it's of interest to those who might have an idea how the pen feels in your hand. I have to admit, I just still can't get over how bad that color looks, and they called it a red color in the auction. So I know people have certain experiences with buying from Chinese pen distributors on eBay or Etsy. And yeah, sometimes things happen a little bit differently. I don't blame the distributors, and I've never had anybody really try to, you know, scam me or do anything that I thought was irregular. I'm certain they probably thought this was a red color. But when you put it in perspective to these other pens, it is not. I've posted the pens so we can take a look at their posted length. All of these pens in the Duofold design, unlike the Schaefer Balance, which posts deeply and securely, these generally post relatively high and make for a fairly long pen. And it does change the weight in your hand when you're writing. You know, depending upon the weight of the pen and things like that, that weight change could be noticeable and might degrade your writing experience. Let's look at the nib end. So the Parker has a nice solid gold 18 karat nib. Parkers are mostly made in France during that period of time. But the Jinhao nib visually holds its own. The original vintage Duofold has a really small section, which is very typical and in common with vintage pens. A very large, nice solid 14 karat gold nib. When they made that first release and brought it back, they started those design elements where there's a gold plated band here, and this has 2 bands at the end of the section. Sometimes they only have 1. You know, when they brought back the Schaefer Balance, they did the same type of design elements here on the section. And the Jinhao section does retain some of those design elements. It's also a very similar shape. They certainly have done homage to the remake of the Parker Duofold. So since I'm not happy with the color of the Centennial, I thought I'd throw it into this collection of orange pens that we have here. So here's your Keiko Retro, here's your Knox Galileo in orange, and here's an orange from Keras Customs. And it certainly fits into this range much more than it fits into the Big Red color range. So if you're looking through auctions or sellers of vintage Parker Duofolds, you might hear them say about the junior version, or they may call it the ladies version. It is substantially smaller than the Big Red. So I just want to show this to visually let you know, as a buyer, you need to be aware of what you're buying. And generally this sells for half the price of a Big Red or the larger size Parker Duofold. And so if you see a bargain, just check out and make certain that those lengths and dimensions are appropriate for what you want to buy. And I mentioned they sometimes come with 3 bands, so here's 3 other vintage Duofolds. They also later on in life had a streamlined version where this was angled down at the blind cap and at the finial at the top. They weren't knurled like they were with these designs. They really, I think, utilize this design in many form factors to make certain that they captured as much of the pen market as they could. So what ink to put in it? Yeah, I went through my list and I said habanero. Haven't done a Noodler's ink in one of my reviews for a while. Here's the color card. It's certainly a nice orangish red color. And if we look at the chromatography, we'll notice a fair amount of yellow. The yellow-orange suits the Jinhao Centennial that I have. So I got almost 100% fill. I did 1 up, and there was a little bit of an air pocket here, down again, back up, and it was pretty full. But I always do 3 to make certain that saturate and that feed, and I got to wipe it down a little bit more. I didn't talk about the fact that there's a nice rubber O-ring at the bottom of that section, so when you screw down the barrel, it seals well against that. And that, I also think that adds friction, so the barrel doesn't just unscrew on its own. Next, nib on paper. So we've come to that all-important, how does it write part of the video. So the ink I chose for this pen, I think, is a great complement to the pen. Ink I haven't used for a while and probably should use more often, but I felt this nib would do it justice, and it does. One of the things that I just can't get used to is this cap just takes too many turns to take off, almost 3 turns. And like I said, my limit's about 2 turns. Anything over 2 turns, I get that, oh, get it over with feeling, and it takes some more turns to get it off. So the pen fits fine in the hand, unposted, and it's actually fairly light. Lighter than I would expect based on looking at the pen and the size. Like all Duofold designs, it does post, but it posts short, so that makes for a very long pen. And it does change the balance, so it's, from a writing perspective, it's not something that I think adds to the writing experience. In fact, it detracts from my viewpoint. Comment section will give you those dimensions. So let's see how that habanero works. As you heard with the microphone next to the nib, this is very smooth. It lays down a nice wet line. So is a Jinhao medium nib. This is a little bit above average, but they're all pretty good. They're not a disappointment. I have them in the X450, the X750, and they write well. And it really works well with this habanero ink, which is like Patchy Sunset, but more on the red side and less yellow. Too bad the pen's not more on the red side and less on the yellow. So let's rate this pen. I'm going to give it an 8.7. So it's going to get one check for the nib because the nib writes very, very well, but you know, the capping and uncapping just doesn't do it for me. There's no reason for that to be that many turns. You know, the posting doesn't work, which isn't something I require in a pen, but something that certainly a pen should be able to do for those people that like to post. And it is very light considering it's a upscale pen. Jinhao put their standard nib in it, so it's not like you're getting a nicer nib when you're paying more money for this Jinhao pen. The build quality is good. Everything fits together well. Everything looks good. You know, I'm certain they're all injection molded parts, but they feel almost like a turned acrylic. So that's the good piece. Yeah, I don't feel like doing details, so we're just going to stick with that 8.7 and put things in perspective. Let's look at what pen I would suggest if you want a pen like this, what I think is a much better value. Those that are regular watchers of my channel probably know what I would bring up is the Moonman M600S. Beautiful acrylic, so you get a lot more choices of colors in acrylics, which I think are visually more entertaining than the plastic used in the Centennial. An excellent Moonman nib in it, which is slightly better, but it's not substantially better than the Jinhao. The Jinhao is a pretty good nib, but it is better. And the fit and finish is just slightly better. Again, it's just slightly better, interesting colors, and it costs less money. Shop around, you'll find it for under 20 on eBay and maybe Etsy, but I'm not certain. And the Jinhao Centennial is close to 20 or over 20, so to me, it's a no-brainer to pick the M600S over the Jinhao Centennial. And my second choice for a pen that I would prefer over the Centennial is the Kaigalu 316. Here we have it in that nice kind of pearl and black or ivory or whatever color you want to call it. It comes in a lot of different colors. Again, a greater variety than you get with the Centennial. Has a great Kaigalu nib in it, which is comparable to the Moonman nib. It writes a little bit differently, a little bit more feedback, but I like the nib, and I've been consistent through the number of years this pen has been made. And they continue to, I think, add different colors to it. And this pen is also over twice the weight of the Jinhao, or close to twice the weight of the Jinhao. So it has that feel to it that the Jinhao doesn't when you hold it in your hand. So I think I've exhausted my discussion on this pen. It did spur me into thinking about different things and doing a lot of comparisons in this video, which I think this pen warrants. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. So we'd like to thank you for watching. May you have many great writing experiences. Enjoy putting a nib on paper, making marks for yourself or others. Maybe you are interested in writing, since it's February, writing a lot of pen pal letters using some of your fountain pens. So we've reached the end of this video. I have a bunch more other pens in the queue, so they'll be coming out. So I'm going to say bye for now. Until next time, and I do really enjoy this ink in this pen. It works well.